So I guess I could have chosen to leave the meeting and made this a difficult presentation.
You could have, and then I would have been absolutely lost.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you not doing that.
So yeah, my name's Elyssa Ford. I'm an associate professor of history at Northwest Missouri State University. I also run our honors program, and we have a minor in public history and museum studies. And then John, I know you. Terry, I'm not sure. I don't think I know you, and I don't know if y'all know each other. So do y'all want to introduce yourselves?
Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Terry Ledbetter, and I am in my first year at San Jose State University, and I just am looking around to see what's available, or just learn new things.
Okay. So are you out in California?
I'm in Connecticut, but I'm doing it online.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, I'm in New York.
Okay. John, do you want to go next?
John Taylor, I teach at the University of Central Missouri. I teach public history as well as courses in American history.
Mary Beth? We're just introducing ourselves.
Hello, I'm Mary Beth Niederkorn. I'm the director at the Cape Girardeau County Archives Center in Jackson, Missouri, and I work closely with Southeast Missouri State University's Department of History and Historic Preservation.
Okay, excellent. So this information about remote internships is by no means something that I have created on my own. This came out of a working group that I was one of the organizers for at the 2020. It must have been the 2020 in National Council on Public History. So there were a few of us that worked together. 3 of us were in academia and 1 person in a museum that organized this working group. And we had 12 participants in that working group. And so the NCPH, for folks that don't know about that, is the main organization for public history. And they have these working groups that participate and discuss at the conference, but they also do a lot of work prior to the conference. So in the months leading up to the conference, we had different, a huge Google Doc that we were creating and kind of putting together different things about remote internships. So we had, of course, started this during the, it was the 2021. Yeah, because March 2020, we barely just begun pandemic life. So 2021 conference is when we were doing this. So, and we were thinking about kind of creating a set of standards, recommendations for designing good remote internships, not just for during the pandemic when, of course, internships kind of all had to go remote, but also because there is a value to having remote internships at other times. And so this is something that we are hoping to get out in the History at Work site of the NCPH and doing some other things with so that it's more widely available to people. That's still just all in process. So for this, we recommend, we have it broken down into site readiness, and that is site readiness kind of for the site, for the academic institution and the faculty supervisor, and also for the student. And looking at what recommendations we have for each of those entities in approaching and preparing for a remote internship. So site readiness, we also have orientation and onboarding suggestions. And again, broken down for kind of the student, but especially for the academic faculty supervisor side and the host institution side. And I'll go through all of these more, but just as an overview. Also some information about promoting communication and facilitating relationships. We have that as a separate category because that's something that's just, it kind of happens organically and easily on site, but then remotely it can be really easy to just forget about and not do. And then we also have some suggestions for like different remote project recommendations, because that's something that sometimes, especially maybe smaller museums, might have a hard time thinking about, like, well, what could we do as options for this? So let me go through some of those main points. So for site readiness, we created a list of some basic kind of questions and like a checklist for host institutions to think about to determine how ready they are to undertake a remote internship. So we had them kind of ask yourself if you can pay your interns for your work. That's not necessarily saying you have to pay your interns. I'm the president of the Historical Society in this county, and like we can't generally pay interns. But that, you know, we want to try to pay our interns, right? And so can you pay your interns? And also don't think that just because they're doing a remote internship, they don't deserve pay. They're doing the same amount of work as an intern on site. Think about what kind of work you're going to offer interns, and also think about the difference between an undergraduate student intern and a graduate student intern. And some of that's obviously the same sort of questions that they should be thinking about for on-site internships. But I think especially that differentiation between like graduate and undergraduate students for remote internships can be really important, because a lot of times the work that gets created for a remote internship can be really like isolating and repetitive, which is probably just going to turn off an undergraduate student from wanting to pursue this as a career, which is not our goal. How committed is the institution to inclusion? And so one of the points we raised here is that it's not okay to use remote internships as a way to avoid bringing people of color physically into the museum, or to use remote internships to create a second tier of internships for poor people or people of color who cannot maybe go to, and this like would be post-pandemic, right? Like, so people who do not have the financial ability to go physically to that museum in that city or wherever it is to do an internship, then they get to do a remote internship. So don't have it be the second tier experience that is creating divisions in experience and then like preparation for work. Are you prepared to integrate the intern into the regular life of the museum? Like if you really just want an intern to do a project that away on the computer and you're not interested in actually training or integrating them into the life of the museum, maybe a remote internship isn't a great idea because they're not going to get that much from it. How up to date is your technology? And so people in this working group raised concerns about, like, can you give students who are working remotely access to the programs that they need to use? Firewalls might prevent them from doing work. Like, so it's thinking about some of those computer system questions that like you don't have to necessarily think about for an on-site internship. So some basic questions that students should be asked to think about if they're planning on doing a remote internship. We suggested things like, do you have access to a reliable computer and internet? That's a basic question, but that's a really important question, especially for students that may live in like rural areas where that internship access or internet access can be difficult. Will this internship advance your career goals? So really think about what you're going to be doing as a part of that remote internship. What kind of experiences do you need? What kind of museum do you want to work in? Can you gain this kind of work experience remotely? Or do you really need to look for something that's on site? And then finally, will the museum provide adequate mentorship and access to the museum? So that you're really thinking about if the museum is not asking those questions or the host site's not asking those questions, hopefully you as we're encouraging the students to ask those questions. We also created a set of kind of recommendations for like post-internship surveys that can go out to the student and can also go out to the host site. And so some of those are like kind of your generic, right, internship questions, but some of them are asking specifically about the remote access. And so maybe I will I'm going to see if I can My mouse has been, I don't know if there's some kind of strange update that has happened, but my mouse has not been happy about like copying, selecting items and copying. Hold on. I'll copy and paste these into the message, the chat here. Maybe I will. But it's not letting me do that for some reason. Well, if you send me an email, then I can email those to you if you want them. So my emails, E is an elephant, B is in Buffalo, Ford like the car. EB Ford at NW Missouri, so Northwest, nwmissouri.edu. And I can share those things with you. Do y'all have any questions about, thank you, Sarah. Do y'all have any questions about any of that information on kind of like site readiness and student readiness, or things that like you want to talk about? Are these things that like you've kind of thought through with students and with sites as you're working with them on internships already, remote internships? And if not, I'm happy to plow forward. Is that what you want? Okay. Okay, orientation and onboarding suggestions. So I think this is sort of like some of that like meat and potatoes stuff that's pretty important. So for academic and faculty supervisor recommendations, which is important for the two of y'all, we recommended that, and this will depend on like the number of interns you have at any given time, but we recommended like if you've got like a group of students going into internships, remote internships at the same time, hold maybe like an introductory meeting with all of them. You could do that in person. You could also do it virtually for all students. And that's not so much, that's kind of like to tell them information, but we talked about it more as a way to help them build a cohort experience when they're not going to get any of that cohort experience when they're doing their internship, because they're doing it on their own and separate from each other. That also helps ease some of the burden on the academic supervisor, because they've got other people to talk to and to go to, as opposed to just you being the person. Like maybe they'd all create a group me and send each other like updates and have a way to communicate. Could be really great. Over the course of the internship, have regular check-ins with students. Maybe these could be weekly updates on like a Google Doc that gets set up that the academic supervisor could read, and students could talk about like the kind of work they've been doing and talk about how things are going. That could be a Google Doc that everyone participates in, or it could be something that just comes to you individually. Like you could think about different ways to do that if you want to like work on that cohort experience. You could also decide if you wanted to have like larger kind of cohort gatherings on Zoom to create some of that face-to-face experience. Create a way for students to all check in with each other, maybe like a discussion board, or that Google Doc could work. We also recommended having a separate and unique agreement with each site that makes clear the student projects, that includes really clear deliverables and clear deadlines for students to meet. And it also includes checkpoints with the site supervisor. And we thought that really needed to be made really clear from the beginning, so that like the student and the site both know, here's what you're working on, here's when things are due, and here's when I'm going to check in with you about that, because it's so easy to like forget about it if you're the host site, because they're just like off there and you never see them. We also said that if possible, this agreement should include additional trainings or professional development opportunities that the host site is going to offer. Just like, again, make it clear so it's like there and you can enter it all into your calendar. We have a series of like, also then recommendations for the host institution to create basically a welcome packet for remote internships. That could include like access and instructions on how to get to like databases or any of the stuff, right? The kind of computery stuff that they're going to need access to. a kind of cheat sheet for students with contact information and troubleshooting tips. Make sure that your documents like staff handbooks and volunteer trainings aren't just on site, but that there's digital copies of them so students can actually see them. Have the information for students all in one place, like a web page with a sign-in, a Dropbox, a OneDrive, a Google Drive, somewhere where it's like, here's all the stuff that you need for your internship. We also recommended that like they should include information about their institutional culture. What kind of things should you wear for a video meetings? Like, I've had students change and like be in a sports bra, and like we don't like, right, they need the reminder sometimes, like what to wear for video meetings. When do you show up for the meetings? Do you want people to have their cameras on or their cameras off? Is that okay? When would you prefer to receive work materials? Do you want email? Is texting okay? Or are you giving that as an emergency, but you don't really want them to text you? What time frame do you expect a response from the intern? Is it within 24 hours? So a lot of that stuff that like, here's what we expect of you, like make it really clear, and it's got to be in that kind of welcome document. To help them get a sense of like where this place is, have like a video tour of the site so they get to actually see the space. Maybe like a meet the staff as like an orientation Zoom call that they have, or have each like staff person do like a little video introduction that then the students get the link to. We also talked about how like in a remote internship, one of the big drawbacks is that you don't get the community experience. And by that we meant like the community in which the museum's situated, right? Like they don't get to interact with any of that. So in addition to like a meet the staff, we also thought it'd be helpful to have like a meet the community kind of space where there would be like links to partner organizations, information about community resources. So they get a sense of like the community that that museum is serving and working with. Have like office hours available for interns to drop in with email or video or call with the site supervisor. Like as professors, we're used to that, but like that can be a really different concept for the host sites. If it's a site that has multiple interns that are working remotely, have the site create a list of all interns and hold an initial meeting so they get to know each other and communicate. So while you as the academic side have like one for all your interns that are off at all these places, also have the host site have one for all of those interns. So they're getting like multiple places to kind of have the sense of community. And we also recommended that they include some social activities like coffee hour, mentoring sessions, museum trivia in like the first 1 to 2 weeks of the internship to help integrate students into the site and like form that sort of cohort. So yeah, questions about any of that? I haven't looked over this material in a while. So when I look at that welcome packet recommendation, I personally am thinking like, oh yeah, that's a really good set of recommendations. And it reminds me that we really need to like get this information out there for people because I think it'll be really helpful. Okay. So the next section that I had was promoting communication and facilitating relationships. So as I talked about already, like that distance can create difficulties in communication and limit opportunities for professional networking. And so in this section, we've got recommendations for one, creating systems and establishing expectations for communication and collaboration. And two, for providing professional development opportunities. And that latter, I think it's like the harder thing to do, but to me, that's what you miss out the most on as a remote internship. You're not getting those connections, that network, and that kind of experience. You can get hands-on work experience, it's great, but that other part's harder. So for systems and expectations for communication and collaboration. So make sure that everything's really transparent. I mean, so some of this is a little bit repetitive with that host site kind of welcome packet. Site supervisors need to really set like expectations of like, when are you working? It's a remote internship. So is the student going to be like working at a job during the day and then doing their stuff overnight? But does the host site like need you to be doing it during the day? Like set these expectations on for work times and like hold interns to that if it's necessary for what's happening at the site. Include like one-on-one check-ins, but then also include like create a chain of communication. So it's maybe not just a single supervisor that student is reporting to, and then that's the only person that student ever gets to work with or experience. Internships should have an additional point of contact in case they can't get in touch with their direct supervisor. But it also is a way for them to like form some additional relationships and gain some additional networking opportunities. Let's see. Is there like much more detail that y'all want about this section? We also broke down some of the suggestions into like what it could look like for a small museum versus a medium museum or a big museum. But I don't know like if that's information that you necessarily want or not. So feel free to tell me, or I'm happy to skip it. I'll go ahead and skip it then. Okay, remote project recommendations. So for that, we said, obviously, like any internship, consider the type of intern and the purpose of the internship. Also consider what can and cannot be done remotely. Obviously, there is some work that cannot be done remotely, right? A lot of kind of collections work cannot be done remotely. So we have possible projects for remote interns, could include things like curriculum development and educational plans, digitization projects and tagging, transcription projects, developing online materials like social media posts, working on websites, virtual exhibits, podcasts. They could engage in research depending on how much of a site's collection has been digitized and is available to the student. If they're doing something remotely though, you've got to remember that the student may also not be where their like university is, which could limit some of their research abilities, right? So that's got to be considered. And then basically we said the world is your oyster, be creative. But we also said it can be really easy to assign repetitive tasks for remote internships like transcription, tagging, editing photographs, but it's pretty boring. And it's really not recommended that that should make up the entirety of an internship experience. Even if that is part of what they're doing, is there a way to make that repetitive work more collaborative? Like maybe the interns could get together and have Zoom tagging parties when they're working on digitizing. Can you incorporate different types of projects into an otherwise repetitive project of digitizing or transcribing? So for instance, could you create like stages with multiple components and different types of deliverables? So maybe you get to one point and then you do like a little video about what you've been doing, or you make like then a poster about it that you can use at a conference presentation. So like have different sorts of things they're doing, like to kind of mix up the like otherwise very like repetitive tasks. We also give some, this is sort of similar to what was up ahead. So this is a reminder to me on what we can adjust before we get this out. Some additional like kind of specific examples, like an ArcGIS story map, a video about the project or materials. And these can be ways that like they're talking about what they're doing, not necessarily something that they're like making as like the deliverable for the institution. So create something for the institution newsletter. As I said, create a poster for a professional presentation. do like that 3-minute thesis model to show what they're learning during the internship. So think of an array of like different possibilities of things they're turning in instead of just the same thing every time. Are there any things that y'all have seen students do or had sites do that you think have worked really well as projects or could work really well as projects for remote internships?
What about indexing a book, maybe? One that hasn't been indexed before, if the student's interested in that kind of thing?
Yeah. It could maybe be something. That's just one where I think it's really not that one, but I mean, this idea, all of these ideas, it's, I think, really helpful to just maybe create like a Google Doc or something that you're able to like add things to as you think of them. And I also think that as like people who are in like the faculty positions, this is something that you can do as well, because sometimes a site may not think of something that they can do, but as soon as you like, oh, here's a list of possibilities, they might look at that and go like, oh, okay, yeah, this is something my students could do. So like at our County Historical Society, they do like a This Week in History of like 75, 50, and 10 years ago. Well, the 75 years ago and the 50 years ago newspapers are digitized on newspapers.com. And so the students are able to go in, even if they're working remotely, to like write up those entries. So there's some different kind of, and that may not be something that like the site, so the site wouldn't normally think of that because they tended to do all of that research by going through the microfilm. And then I said, but it's digitized. Students could be working on this too. So yeah, just create a list of possibilities. And I think as like a host site also can create a list of possibilities so that then whenever there's someone who's maybe interested in internship, you've got like all these projects that you can kind of list out and see what they might be interested in working on. Yeah. So I think kind of a conclusion takeaways are that assess readiness first. Second, communication and conflict. Like there probably will be conflict and misunderstandings, but kind of lay out kind of those rules and practices for communication. Third, find the balance between on-site and remote internships. There are some institutions that during COVID went obviously remote, but then decided they were going to stay remote, which it can be okay, but it's also then like kind of denying an opportunity for students. And some of these are like significant institutions in Washington, D.C. that sort of like are denying students that opportunity to ever get that work experience and then be able to like get into those jobs. Both remote and in-person internships can be beneficial to students and host sites, but they are different. And we as a group did not think that remote internships were the perfect substitute for in-person on-site internships. However, with the kind of fourth takeaway, we thought that they're really valuable because they help promote equity and inclusion. So I'm in a rural area. A lot of our students are first generation and come from limited financial backgrounds. These are students that basically have to do an internship that is in the community where they're from, where they're going to be in the summer. But a lot of them are from communities where they graduated with 10 people. Like there's not a museum there. And so a remote internship is offering them an opportunity to have an experience that otherwise is really only available for kind of upper income students to have. So I see it as a way to really help even out some of that financial disparity in museums. And if you look at museum workers as a field, they're like from a much higher economic level because of that ability to access those internships. So that's kind of my stuff in a nutshell, a long 33-minute long nutshell. So are there questions that y'all have, or you think, or is there anything that y'all want to talk about with like your experiences related to remote interns? John, have you had students that have done remote internships since the pandemic stuff?
Yes. In fact, we have students working. We were able to get CARES Act money to create Historic Missouri.
Mhm.
So if you can take a look at historicmissouri.org, it's a phone app as well as a web interface. And so students can research, write, and then upload content that create historic tours about the important people and places of Missouri. So that's been very helpful and has helped during COVID and continues to provide opportunities for students. And our students are very similar to Elyssa's. Some of them don't have vehicles, which, I mean, they can't, it has to be in the community, and there are only so many kind of options. And so we can host remotely with Historic Missouri, giving them opportunities to add research using using newspapers.com, which Elyssa mentioned, which is a really important resource, I think. So, yeah.
Terry, what about you? Since you are already working remotely, and then do you have like interns that you work with in your position? Oh, are you a student? Oh, okay. Have you done a remote internship? No? Okay. Not yet. But now you know the questions to ask when you go into one, right? Yeah. Mary Beth, what about you? Have y'all had, I know you said most of your stuff was with the CMO students.
Mhm.
Have you ever done like remote internships with students from other locations?
No, we haven't. That was really why I wanted to attend today, was to kind of get an idea of what our site would need to do in order to attract that kind of thing, and what we would need to do in order to make it worth the students' while, if you know what I mean.
Mhm.
We are primarily not online. Our collection is mostly just a paper copy, county government records. So a lot of the work that we would have students do would be along the lines of organization. So it's very hands-on, or mending paper, that kind of thing. But we definitely have opportunity for students to work on the kinds of projects. I mean, we had a student, and we had an intern last semester who built a database of, she compared different sites' social media presence, and kind of gave me an idea of how we could build out our social media calendar so we can kind of improve our online presence. So that was a really successful project.
Mhm.
And I had a bunch of raw data that I had another student kind of clean up and break down for me, and that was also really helpful. But that was, I would really consider that more of a hybrid kind of thing, where the students were here for most of their hours, but they were also able to take things home and work on them, or work on them from a remote location, because the university is about a half an hour drive from the archive center, and not every student has a vehicle. So if we were able to open this up a little bit, I think that would be beneficial.
That's something that I just put together for our museum, was a kind of a call for marketing and PR interns that would be like some on site, but also remote work as possible. And I think if something like a hybrid option like that can be really great for kind of that PR marketing, because something that we do, but like it would be nice to do more of, is have like, once a week, a spotlight on like a photograph or an object or something from the collection that then there's maybe some research done on it, or it's like, who's this, or, whatever you want to do with it. So the student would need to be there to like choose what they want, but then they can take it home to do some work on researching it, preparing the social media kind of posts and things like that. Yeah. There could also be options of maybe thinking about internships that kind of could build on each other. So if there's people who are working on something on site, they're doing something with a set of materials that then is making those materials where they'll then be available for remote interns to do like the next set with, like maybe they're researching it, using that for an exhibit, or they're making it into a website or making it more publicly available. Other thoughts or questions?
So Elyssa, what's the next steps for your, I guess, your draft?
Yeah, so we had gotten it, I think, let me see, I'm trying to remember. I need to follow up again with the, I think it's like the education committee. Because we'd like to have it set, like available there as sort of one of those white papers, because they have like on the NCPH site, they've got the set of like recommendations for internships, like best practices for internships, to have it be kind of a best practices document for remote internships. That committee I just need to follow up with them again on that. And then for history at work, they wanted to see it kind of organized in a bit of a different way, so that just someone has to have some time to be able to do that. Because I'd like to be able to have it in both, because if it just appears as like a best practices, like no one knows it's there. But if there's like the history at work that gives the overview of it, then, and says, hey, listed under best practices, then it'll point people in that direction. So that's what I think those of us who are the organizers of the working group are hoping for. And it's been through a lot. Like we spent basically a year after the NCPH, the entire working group still like editing the document and like putting it together. So there's been a lot of work that's been put into it. So I hope we're able to get it out somewhere.
Maybe they can put a blurb in the newsletter.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be another place to add it for sure. Yeah.
I think it's great. So
Yeah, thanks. You just always need more time, right?
we always need more time.
Yeah. So, well, thank you so much for coming. And if you want, if there's like any components of that, the things that I talked about that you want to see, like I talked about those kind of post-internship surveys, or Mary Beth, I don't know, because you left for a minute, so I don't know if you'd gotten to hear the stuff about the host institution welcome packet recommendations. Yeah, you got that? Okay, perfect. I was gonna say that would be like a key one. So yeah, if there's things like that that you want to see, just feel free to send me an email and I'll see if I can make a copy and paste function work, because it was not working in the chat function for me here. So, cool. Well, thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Yes. I will put the recording of this out probably by the end of the week. So if you need a refresher on anything we talked about, it'll be on our YouTube and you'll all get an email with the link as well.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.